spaces within offshore wind farm developments, and it will give perspectives from the Netherlands and also a discussion and perspectives from the UK point of view. So I'm going to now pass over to Abigail, and hopefully everything will go smoothly. So there we go.
Lovely. So we'll start off with a very simple Menti question. If everyone could just rate your current knowledge of multi-use spaces, and we can make sure everything's kind of set up and everyone's logged in before we move on. Lovely, got some thumbs up, that's good. So spoiler alert, there's another one of these right at the end, so we'll hopefully see an increase. Lovely. We want to shuffle to the next one, maybe.
Yeah. So it's good to get the understanding of who's in the audience and get a feel for what the understanding is. And it looks like everybody's heard of multi-use at least, so that's great.
Yeah. So just to give a little bit of context before I hand over to Eline, the UK has a very developed offshore wind industry, which is aiming to grow from around 14 gigawatts to 50 gigawatts by 2030. There is a large focus on further development within the North Sea, which already has 15 operational offshore wind farms in UK waters alone. Alongside this movement towards green energy, the UK is beginning to implement conservation considerations into new legislation, for example, biodiversity net gain legislation, which is coming into force in a couple of months. And then it is assumed that marine net gain will follow after that, probably focusing on mitigating damage to the marine environment and conserving native species throughout the development and decommissioning of infrastructure. And then if we go on to the next slide. Yep, and then I'll hand over to Eline to talk about the Netherlands and their use of multi-use spaces already. Yeah.
Thank you, Abby. And welcome, everyone. My name is Eline van Onselen. I'm a marine ecologist and I work for the Rich North Sea program. And the Rich North Sea program is part of the North Sea Foundation and the Dutch Nature and Environment Foundation, Natuur en Milieu. And we look at the opportunities for nature within offshore wind farms. And today I will be telling you a little bit about the Dutch case of multi-use in offshore wind farms, what the current situation is, and what our vision for the future is. So as you probably all know, the Dutch North Sea is quite a small area, but it's quite intensively used. There's, of course, fisheries, there's oil and gas extraction, there's sand extraction, and now offshore wind is also in development, and it's quite a fast development as well. And quite early already in the planning phases, the idea came of multi-use, of using the space between the turbines for other uses than offshore wind, because right now everything within an offshore wind farm is limited to offshore wind. So the idea was to maybe create what we call area passports, where the area is basically divided into pieces, and every piece will be assigned a specific activity. The areas are then divided in such a way that you can only use it as a multi-user if you have a permit. So it needs to go through a permitting procedure, and if it is a good idea, it fits into the area passports, then the company is allowed to do their business in the same space. This of course allows for multiple uses of the same area, which would be quite efficient. And that's the theory, but I'll go more into practice later on. See if we can go to the next slide. There we go. But first, we would like to ask your opinion. Do you think the area between wind turbines should be available for development? See if I can go to the slide myself as well. I see some interesting results already. Lots of maybes, only one no, and I think that's quite interesting. Lots of yeses. Is there anyone who already wants to say something about their answers, or should we continue to the next slide? Yeah, let's continue. Please explain your answer. No. I hope you can, in a few short words. There's 200 characters. Depend on the development. Yeah. Again, depend on the development. Efficient use of space. Consider reserving the space for nature. Yeah, definitely. Depends. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of answers that go into the same direction. So maybe it depends on the type of development, but we need to make sure it's sustainable and keep nature in mind. Can be done safety, then no reason not to. Will require clear communication between users. Yeah, definitely. Depends on the habitat. Yeah, very interesting. It's useful to explore possibilities. Yeah, yeah. Okay. I think it's good to look into what's possible, what's going on right now, and the things that we run into. So a multi-use space is basically just that. It's an activity that occurs between the wind turbines. It's an undeveloped area, and the main advantage of the area is that it's closed for other activities, right? So no shipping, no trawling, no other types of extraction. And if you would use that area, maybe you could increase production in some kind of way. It would be nice to be agreed upon during a development stage of an offshore wind farm. And this is something that right now we're struggling a little bit with in the Netherlands, because on the one hand, you want to design a wind farm as efficiently as possible, but on the other hand, the area passports, as we call them, are only available when the wind farm has finished the building phase. So it's really hard to plan in such a way to really make efficient use of the space. Let's go to the next slide. So in practice, right now, offshore wind farms are, well, leased out for development. And then the area passports are created. And after the wind farm is opened, well, for business, so to say, people can go through the permitting procedure to look at multi-use. And if the permits are granted, then of course access is also granted. And what we see in practice right now in the Netherlands, we have one wind farm with a finished area passport. And we do not see a lot of permitting applications. And that might be because the business case is not quite clear yet. Of course, offshore wind farms are offshore. They're quite far offshore, and it's a new type of development to look at multi-use. So the business case might just not be ready yet to implement. We do see some really nice pilot projects starting to pop up here and there, and I think that might be the start of further development. Let's go to the next slide. So it would be nice, of course, to be able to, for example, continue certain activities that were there before under certain constrictions. And of course, if you have a permit for multi-use in an offshore wind farm, at some point the wind farm will be decommissioned. So right now, the idea behind the area passports are also that they are sort of time constrained. So when the wind farm is decommissioned, your multi-use activity will end as well. And that might make it even more complicated to actually have a business case offshore. And it's not really clear how well the Dutch government is going to work around that after decommissioning, because it's not completely clear what will happen to the offshore wind farm areas either. If, for example, it's going to be repowered after decommissioning, so a new wind farm might come in the same place, or it might be decommissioned completely, leaving, well, the seafloor open to other developments or back to its previous use. Let's continue. So right now there are some pilots already going on in multi-use, and what we see is it's usually aquaculture. So it can be shellfish aquaculture, like this OOS pilot, which looks at mussel farming. In the Netherlands, we also have a pilot going in the Borselen area for shellfish farming as well, which is, I think, a combination of mussels and flat oysters. And of course, if you use aquaculture as multi-use, it's quite an easy step to look at nature restoration as well. If you use aquaculture in such a way that the shellfish or the shells can fall off the lines, for example, and maybe create a reef underneath. By using artificial reefs, you might enhance an effect like that. There are also some pilot projects with passive fisheries. So, for example, crabbing or small line fishing even. And also with solar farms. In the Netherlands, we have an offshore test site, which is comparable to an offshore wind farm. And here the company Oceans of Energy are working with offshore solar panels. And I think in the next few years, they will also be expanding into an offshore wind farm. So there are definitely steps being taken to roll out concepts like this. And other than that, you see some innovation, like, for example, wave or tidal energy coming up. And also, I didn't mention that before with aquaculture, it's also mariculture. So, for example, seaweed farming is also an option, of course. Next slide, please. So, of course, as the Rich North Sea program, we think we should look at the opportunities for nature in offshore wind farms. And we also think that nature should be the base of everything that we do. So if you build a nature-inclusive wind farm, then there still might be place for multi-use as long as you do it in a nature-inclusive way and a nature-inclusive design. So, for example, by placing artificial reefs or making use of the hard substrate, some species might get the chance to recover. And if you look at multi-use in such a way that nature is a use, you might get different results from when you say nature is not a user, but it's the base for everything that we do. So it's either offshore wind, but it can also be aquaculture. It can be solar. As long as you go towards the biodiversity net gain, as long as you look at nature as the base for everything that you do, then I think there might be a case for doing it on a multi-use level as well. Let's go to the next one. Let's see if you're still awake. What activities would you prioritize within multi-use spaces? Let's see if the spider web can form a little bit. If you've lost the slide on your Mentimeter, then it might help to refresh the page. And there's also sometimes a button that says go to slide. There we go. I see a lot of points going into conservation. For me, that's of course good news, of course. I see almost nothing in left undeveloped, so that's also very interesting. Passive fishery is somewhere in between, I think. Aquaculture also scores quite high. And test site innovation, that's quite low actually. This is very interesting outcome. And I think it's interesting to see the left undeveloped and conservation being so contradicting actually. Because a lot of the times when we talk about conservation or nature restoration, doing nothing might be the best option for nature. So passive conservation might also be conservation. I think that's also a matter of wording here. Very interesting. Thank you. Let's go to the next one. And I think this is pretty much well, a knock-on effect of everything you do in the ocean or in the sea. As we build offshore wind farms, of course, the knock-on effect is that you create reef effects. And what you see is that the reef effects are never as as effective, basically, as the natural environment. So putting down scour protection, for example, it creates a reef effect, but the reef is not as biodiverse as a natural reef. But you do see some advantages. And of course, in the Dutch North Sea area, we used to have around 30% of hard substrate reefs, but we really effectively fished them out. So now that we're building again with hard substrate, a nice knock-on effect, of course, is the increase of biodiversity. If you look into other parts other than nature, then of course there can also be an increase of food sources, increase of carbon, and then of course in the end, if you have more human use, you also create more jobs, which is of course something we all would like to see. I think that's it for now, and I'll pass it back to Abby, and we can discuss it later.
Okay, thank you, Eline. So now I'll go through some of our thoughts about implementing multi-use spaces in the UK and how we can build on what the Netherlands have already started. So firstly, we can add multi-use areas into development planning, which would alleviate the pains of adding clauses into already developed or approved wind farms. As you can imagine, developers are not necessarily interested in continuing lengthy legal discussions once their initial application process is already completed and development has begun. So by having these spaces written into the application, it may increase their implementation even when they are not mandatory, and having offshore wind farm developers and business owners discuss access and risks during the early application process can alleviate issues with defining who is responsible for actions and monitoring and risk assessments and so on. As a knock-on effect of that, area passports could be published and permit applications allowed before the farm even begins development, rather than in the Netherlands having to wait until the wind farm is fully operational to even see whether businesses are eligible to apply for a permit. There is also the possibility of multiple activities occurring within one area, which I think Eline actually touched on. Most likely habitat restoration on the seabed, with aquaculture higher up in the water column, and then potentially even a business on the surface as well. There is possibility for businesses to innovate and collaborate together, which is very interesting. And of course, funding is a very big issue, especially if we are aiming for more local UK businesses and startups to apply for these permits. So incentives would be necessary. Yep. So the current UK Marine Management Plan has used a very traditional approach of defining marine areas into either offshore wind or aquaculture, with no other activities permitted in these areas. There would, of course, need to be revisions if multi-use is going to be integrated, especially as North Sea becomes busier and busier as the year goes on. And we need to consider that local fisheries will likely be concerned about competition and risks to their livelihood due to either additional aquaculture development or conservation areas. So involving them in discussions is incredibly important. Although the offshore wind and fishing industries are highly developed currently, other industries need further testing and product development to exploit these very dynamic environments and do so safely. And lastly, any protected or ecologically enhanced areas of conservation need pretty consistent monitoring to prevent damage or illegal use. And then, of course, you have all the associated costs and risks of having personnel go to an offshore site. So yeah, if you'd like to move on to the next one. It's a Menti question. Yeah, so I'll hand over to the room now. Are there any considerations I haven't mentioned, or any points that you'd like to add on to things I have mentioned, anything that I haven't really gone into too much? Yeah, really good to see what everyone else's thoughts are. Yeah. I know we have a big variety of people in the room, so it'd be good to see everyone's opinions.
Yeah, and I think at this stage, if you wanted to use your microphone to join the discussion, you're very welcome. I'm not sure if everybody's seen, but there was also a comment in the chat box that doing nothing might suggest no management rather than conservation of nothing. So that's an interesting comment.
Yeah. I think chat can be open as well. If anyone doesn't have Menti up right now, or it's locked them out, feel free to just put it on the chat and we can see it from there.
Oh, there's a few comments there. Yeah, so I guess just to put this out in discussion, really good presentation. So thank you for that. That's very kind. And the benefit of doing nothing is a really good point. Yeah. I guess nature doesn't really need us to manage itself, and that's definitely a good point to keep in mind.
And then the other comment: does this mean that currently there is no permitting process to have agriculture projects within a wind farm? That is correct. There is no current permitting process, I believe. It's the offshore wind farm is completely set aside. And then no one can there's very limited traveling even between wind turbines, despite there being a very large space. It's all just completely left undeveloped. with obviously some cable routes in between, but yeah.
But I believe there's some UK experts in the audience as well, MMO or some of the developers that possibly joined us. So please join in and feel free to chat with us. I think part of the reason why there isn't permitted development at the moment is really due to kind of risk insurance kind of aspects. So that's probably part of it. So there was another comment in the chat box here.
Do we have well-developed case studies and examples of early good practice across all the areas discussed, which are well evaluated and costed? That is a very interesting point. The main thing that you see a lot, which kind of limits further development, is lack of pilots, and like you say, lack of very thorough, large-scale pilots. Do you want to allow Sean to have a chat, or?
Yeah, there is a hand up here from Sean. Please go ahead if you want to join us.
Oh, hi, thank you. Sean Jamshidi here from the MMO, our Strategic Renewables Unit. I think you're absolutely right that kind of the main barrier is often that kind of lack of incentives and lack of kind of push to do things to kind of require coexistence. Especially, for example, like with aquaculture, there's the safety. The safety aspect is a huge one, because just to clarify, there's not actually a legal restriction on aquaculture within a wind farm. There's nothing kind of saying in the UK that you can't do it. It's just that there hasn't yet been a case where that's been kind of agreed upon between the developer, but legally there's nothing to stop it. And I think, and certainly the marine plans actually encourage coexistence between different sectors. It's just a matter of kind of actually getting it to happen, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean. Yeah, thank you for the clarification. That was really helpful. Got a few more things. Yeah, great collaboration between developers, kind of like what Sean just said. Yeah, users and government and this official linkage. Yeah. That's interesting. Bring it up, the differences between fixed and floating as well, especially as we start targeting floating wind development a little bit more.
Yeah. And I guess for some of the aquaculture companies or fishermen, some of the wind farms are potentially a bit further out of shore than they probably usually go. So there could be an additional cost of the transfer and traveling to and fro as well.
Yeah, I suppose that might link back to why a lot of people see a lot more potential in conservation, because that's something that you can do monitoring, but you don't have to have personnel necessarily on site or traveling to site and from site as often as you would need to with businesses. So
perhaps more passive.
Yeah.
Elaine, did you have any more further comments?
Yeah, I think the difference right now between the UK and the Netherlands is quite interesting, because or maybe not even the difference, but the similarities, where we have a very different system right now with the area passports and the permitting system. But in the end, the effect is actually quite the same. Because for us, we also don't have that many permitting procedures being started. And I think it's both because the business case is not quite clear yet. For multi-use offshore, the developers are a little bit afraid of actually doing it, both on the offshore wind farm side as well as on the other side, because if you look at in the Netherlands, you have the safety zone around the turbine. And that area will be it will be, even when you have multi-use, it will still be excluded. So it's really the area in between the turbines that's open for other use, and the restrictions are still quite high. I mean, there is still a safety risk as well if you work within a wind farm. So I can really see, it's easy to doubt, and it's easy to see risks for industrial multi-use like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Let's move on with the next slide. I'm conscious of time as well.
Yeah, so just a really, really quick summary slide. Obviously, multi-use spaces do have potential to increase food sources, local jobs and businesses, but as I think we've made very clear today, should be very thoroughly thought out to ensure positive outcomes are met and risks are as limited as they can be, as well as saving time and money by streamlining permitting processes. I think we've got a couple more Menti questions. You want to go on to the next one?
Yeah, we're literally nearly there, so hopefully we haven't put you off your lunch just yet. So I think there's 2 more slides to go. So literally on the brink of finishing off for this afternoon. So what we're hoping to see that suddenly everybody is an expert on offshore multi-use.
Oh no, it's slightly going down.
I only got more confused.
Yeah. Oh no.
Oh, that's something I learn as I'm working in the offshore ecology field. The more I know, the more I know I don't know.
Yeah, that's very, very true.
That's the trouble with research, isn't it?
Yes.
Just end a bit more questions.
Yeah.
Really appreciate all the feedback. So one more slide, I believe, if I remember our slides.
Just a little slide, and then after this, it's about talking about.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And if anyone would like to hear a bit more, maybe go a little bit more in depth. We would like to have a few more speakers come along if we were to do some workshops or another webinar. So yeah, if people could show us your interest, what specifically you're interested in or would like to come along to, that'd be really good for us to get a little bit of feedback.
Yeah, I think we see this talk on multi-use as a bit of a taster session to see what the level of interest is, if it's worth organising another event, inviting some more fascinating speakers, and see if we can make perhaps a half-day workshop of it. It seems that there is quite a lot of interest in that. As you know, the invitations were sent to individuals directly, or at least organisations. And next time we could also open this up to the wider sector, maybe putting it on LinkedIn and things like that to advertise the event. So it could definitely be something a bit more wider. Yeah.
And I will be distributing these slides afterwards, and I believe the recording as well. If not, the recording might be on YouTube, and then we'll send it out that way. So yeah, maybe if anyone's just interested in perhaps being one of those speakers, when I send out those emails, if you just want to ping a message back and just be like, oh, here's something I'm really interested in, or something that you think you can help us with, it'll be really, really nice to hear from you guys. So, and any general feedback as well.
All right, I'd like to thank Eline and Abby for doing a great job in explaining a bit more about multi-use. Thank you to the audience today as well. Hopefully we haven't put you off your lunch and you're ready to tackle the rest of the afternoon. Have a great weekend, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.